So it's so wonderful to have people here today, and I'm super excited to be talking to Simone about facilitation. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm standing. I'm based on Wurundjeri land in Naarm in Melbourne in Australia, and I wanted to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty of this land here hasn't been ceded. Lovely to see our participants acknowledging the land in which they're coming in from today as well. So today is a really fabulous opportunity to meet someone who I think is rather fantastic, Simone Mouse. I met Simone a few months ago when I attended a Zenity training session and had an opportunity to experience this unique way of working, and so wanted to provide an opportunity for some of my networks and other networks across LinkedIn to access some of her knowledge and hear a bit more about being a facilitator, some of the challenges and how to respond to those, but also how to build and strengthen your practice. Many of you would have seen through your registration that Simone has actually got over 10 years experience teaching a facilitation diploma at Zenity Global, and she's also a leading facilitation expert, a professional facilitator herself and a skills trainer, and works in team development as well. So very excited to have you here with us today, Simone. And I've, for those that don't know me, I've set up a consultancy a few years ago, working as a facilitator and a coach here in Melbourne in Victoria in the not-for-profit sector. And I've got sort of over 25 years experience working, responding in the community sector, both in practice, but also in leadership and governance roles. So it's so exciting to meet like-minded people and have these sorts of conversations. So today we're going to spend some time exploring what is facilitation and some of the challenges. And I've got a number of questions that I'm going to be asking Simone, but we're also going to weave in some of the questions that you asked when you registered for today's event. So I think that's enough of my voice. I would love to hear your voice, Simone, and opportunity for you to say hello. And my first question is, what do you love about facilitation?
Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks so much for this opportunity and for inviting people and meeting you all. Yeah, well, I was introduced to facilitation all the way back in Germany where I lived and was born. And I was really fascinated by the opportunity of bringing groups together and getting all voices heard. And I can maybe tell a little bit of a story. Being German, I grew up, and also in East Germany and under communism, I grew up with quite a bit of phobia around groups, anything related to group work. And that came mainly through, the fear of groupthink, what can happen when a group gets into a groupthink, and also the peer pressure and the factions and the power abuse that can happen in groups. So I was quite afraid of being in groups, being part of groups, etc. And then I discovered this magic of facilitation and the facilitator who has a particular role to create some neutrality in bringing the group together. So I love how a facilitator can really help to make it easier for the group and can bring in some process expertise. And also what I find in groups is like there's always that balance between individual needs and group needs. And the facilitator has that skill to bring individual needs together so that the group can thrive. So I feel like there is this great potential of really getting individual potential thrive and group potential thrive, and it gets even better altogether. So you access something like collective intelligence that is bigger than its parts. You might have heard of that before, that's really what facilitation is able to do, and to bring the group into some sort of flow state so you can work with high performance. So it links very much to group dynamics and team development as well, that a facilitator can hold space in. So that's really what I love about facilitation and the potential of that in the world, of bringing particular really diverse perspectives together and make smarter decisions together. That's really what I'm passionate about.
Thank you. I know that many of our participants are interested in hearing a bit more about how you do that, and I'm going to ask you about that a little bit later. But in the meantime, would love to hear your perspective on, what is the role of a facilitator? There are so many roles and hats that we play, and often we have people who identify as mentors or coaches or trainers. I know a lot of people that I work with, often struggle with the difference between, well, what's a trainer and what's a facilitator. So I'm really interested in hearing from you, Simone, about how is facilitation different to other roles?
Yeah, really, really good question. I mean, obviously, many people coming to our training wearing other hats as well. There's seldom that just someone is just a facilitator. And it's really interesting to see how some of those preconditioned identities or preconditioned other roles really influence the way someone facilitates. And that's really fascinating in our training to see. Yeah, the difference of a facilitator, like the way we, in sort of in this purest form, you could say a facilitator is neutral in terms of content. So you're not a content expert and you're staying out of content. And a role of a facilitator is to be really in service to the group to achieve its purpose. So I often say the facilitator is not a boss, it's the purpose that the group decided to have and to come together for a reason, right? They come in together for a reason to achieve something. That's the boss. And the culture that group creates on how they're gonna get there. So these are the cornerstones that the facilitator uses to facilitate a group. So the role of a facilitator is to make things easy. That's the simplest definition. It's to make things easy. And a facilitator is not a content expert. A facilitator is a process expert and a group dynamic expert. So you're bringing a lot of process skills in that help certain situations for the group to achieve its purpose. And the more processes the more you can pivot in the moment, depending on what the group needs. And a group does most of the work. In a really good facilitator is almost invisible. And you might have experienced that, right? Like it gets really the group going and engaging and stays out of it. Yeah, that's probably the main characteristics of a facilitator.
It sounds quite liberating to step into facilitation if that's the case. That opportunity to guide, but to not have to be the expert in everything. It sounds like if you're an expert in anything, it's process and holding space. Simone, there are so many things that people are fearful of when they step into something like facilitation, and people have shared some of those with us when they registered, which is really lovely. Before we attend to some of those things that people were asking about in relation to the challenges that they experience when facilitating, I wondered whether you could share with us, from your experience, what are the common challenges or fears that people experience when they are stepping into a facilitation role?
Yeah. So I mean, like you said, Sarah, lots of the challenges that you brought on are really typical challenges of a facilitator. How to make people to participate, how to equalize voices in a room, how to listen to everything that's going on and making some sort of sense and bringing it together. I also focused, when I was thinking about this, about what challenges I see when the facilitators come to our training. And that's like changing that old pattern from wherever they come from, if a trainer or a counselor or whatever, like how can they shift? And the challenges I often see is trusting the group. That's one big challenge, like giving away a little bit of power and a little bit of holding on to the content and the agenda and what's happening, and trusting the group more. That's really one big challenge a lot of facilitators face. And staying out of the content. So if you use, and I come from a training background, And like my idea was, okay, as a trainer, I'm responsible for the group, I'm responsible for the training content, etc. So I'm holding this really, really tightly. And I feel ashamed when I don't have an answer to any questions. It's also kind of an old tradition, old conditioning. But I think times have changed, and information out in the world is so fast moving that for a trainer not to know is actually quite liberating for the students. So having a facilitator hat on is like really navigating the unknown. So it's being okay with, I actually don't know, does anyone else in the group has the answer to this? Like bringing it always back to the group and trusting the resources in the group and staying out of content. That's a real shift I find is really challenging for people. And like Sarah said, when you actually got it, oh my God, life is so much easier because you have to do so much less. And you can focus on what a facilitator really needs to do, which is listening, presence, holding space. But another thing I want to mention, also one of the key challenges, is how to deal with dominant voices in the room, or someone who really hijacks the space, talks a lot, etc. So that sort of, some of you mentioned, for example, the senior people coming into the room, different hierarchies, how to work with that, different power barriers or power structures in the group. And like, how can you also, like, I find like a big challenge is how can you intervene a dominating voice without being rude? So that's the real big challenge that often people have, and really bring all the other voices in. That's some of the challenges I find. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to in a moment ask you to share some tips for us around some of the challenges that come up. But I noticed when people registered to come along today, there were a number of themes that emerged in terms of the specific things that people are experiencing. Some of the things that we saw were people being concerned about how you cater to the entire group and ensure that everyone does have a voice. And there was definitely a piece in there around the sort of the conflicting priorities that people have, the agendas that people might bring into a space even. And also sort of the expectations that different people within groups might experience. I'm wondering what, when I describe some of those particular things that people have flagged, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think the whole thing about how to equalizing voices in the room and how to really get everyone there is a lot. I mean, I can there's a whole training around this. Of course, I can talk a lot about that, because it starts right from the beginning, from your preparation, right? From your brief, who is in the room? What do I need to know about the group? Are there any characters I should be talking beforehand? Do you want to do any interviews to see what people's concerns are? Like if there's a real strongly conflicting issue, you might want to have interviews. So the sort of emotional side of things is handled before it comes into the group, so people feel heard right from the beginning. And then in the group, like presenting purpose and culture are very, very key, and getting the group to consent to that. And the purpose is quite a big job, I find, to agree what is actually the purpose on why I'm coming in. Because there will be different purposes, right? There will be the purposes of the client who pays you, and there will be the purposes of the group. And what is it you're actually there for? And then people mixing up outcomes with purposes, because purpose is the ultimate intention. What's the intention? What are you trying to get to? What is you trying to achieve? That's the bigger purpose, or the higher purpose of the gathering. And to find that is really, really crucial, because that is your North Star when you go into the group. And sharing that with the group and getting the group's consent, okay, we're all on the same page to go there, will help with some of that alignment. Same with the culture. If you have time, getting people to ask, what are some behaviors we need today that makes it successful? And it can be quite fast, like a 5-minute on the flip chart. That early engagement helps people already to take some responsibility for how this day is going. and then doing a little check-in, like whether for some question around amplifying voices, like how to bringing voices early into the room is really, really important in order to create engagement. And so there is we call it a check-in. It's a process you learn really in depth when we do our training, which is giving everyone a voice right at the beginning. And depending on your time, of course, of your engagement, it all is different. Like you might want to do small groups or you want to do it as a whole. It also depends on the purpose. If the purpose is connection, you might want to have spent more time on check-in because you actually hear everyone's voice longer. You use structured rounds where you actually control that everyone has a go and when and how long. And yeah, so there's so many little things there, how to bring that in. And then also like particular dealing with dominant voices. And that's something you have to practice a bit, is like how to sort of energetically, also using your whole body, like energetically going in and say, thank you. We heard your perspective, really, really, welcome to share that. And I love to hear other perspectives in the room as well. And you shift it across, and then you pick from some people who are less, and then that really goes down to valuing diversity, like not being scared of disagreements or diverse opinions. That's a real skill that I'm really standing strong as a facilitator, because you will never get real buy-in or real alignment if you don't give permission to say no and permission to disagree. So the storming phase or the storming activity of a group is super essential to perform. And so as a facilitator, to redefine conflict or disagreement and not having, dealing with your own fears and triggers around that is really, really important. So you can hold a space of everything is welcome, and then also when I think sometimes dominant voices also haven't been heard for ages, and sometimes it's also, it feels good for them to feel heard and to be acknowledged. Also in the training, we just like they're using different listening filters that can help you to listen for different things, so you don't get triggered by characters that might be triggering you. So that's just a whole other thing. But there was a lot already. There we go. So
I did want to ask you a little bit about that. So that idea of staying present in the moment when things are going down. One of the things that people do worry about is that idea of how to actually manage conflict that might be happening in the group, and particularly because many of us, certainly lots of the people I work with, they're people that are in helping professions. They're there because they want to do good. They're often great smoothers, trying to create spaces where things feel good all the time. So that sort of that idea of yours around actually, you're kind of almost walking into being okay to kind of walk into the fire in lots of ways, to be in that conflict is a real challenge. I wondered whether you, I'm not going to ask you to tell us everything that you could possibly do in that scenario, but what are some of the things that people can do in order to stay present, be able to deal with those moments of conflict, particularly, I know a lot of the work that Synergy does is around whole body work.
Yeah, well, one of the key things, was one of the questions, what is the number one skill of a facilitator? If I have to pick one, I would say it's presence. And by presence, I mean it's you can be able to be present to the group as much as possible and hold a real wide presence, which we call holding space. And when it comes to these conflicting situations, what happens with our presence is it goes out of the window because we get triggered and our fear as a heart is beating, and we get really shaken up and our presence goes inward and into protection, right? And so the practice as a facilitator is like, what do you need to do to self-facilitate to come out of that trigger and still be out again in service with the group and present? So that's the personal work a facilitator needs to do to hold bigger spaces. Now, some of that we practice, like our training is full of practice for you to practice different scenarios, different interventions, things you might find challenging, finding a new language on how to intervene. And so that gives you an embodied experience of how you can deal with those situations, which is really behavior changing, really transformative. So you're not just intellectually understand it, you get an experience. Oh, it's actually not as hard and the world doesn't go down if I actually get assertive. You know, so like this is like practicing a new way of being. But it's also like, I mean, obviously, when I say, you know, presence, there's a lot around, we do, when for people doing, for example, the facilitation diploma, we recommend for facilitators to have a personal development program as well as part of the diploma, which works with those inner triggers. You know, if we get really quickly triggered in trauma, I mean, if you are coming from counseling and health, you probably have done lots of that in your training yourself. So you know the principle of it, right? Like it's like dealing with your inner traumas. So that cleaning that up helps you to hold bigger spaces, to get less triggered. But I mean, there's also the thing around psychological safety. Like your concern is the group, of course, you know, and how can you keep the group safe? And safe is a very individual thing. So people feel safe and others don't feel safe. So the culture, I think, is a really key thing. You know, at the beginning, you create the group culture by the group. So the group can give you a flavor of what do I need, particularly in this subject, with this purpose. Is it highly energetically charged? You know, is this really, really emotional? You know what you're walking into, or make sure you know what you're walking into. And then you create a safe culture. Like how do we need to behave? Is there a safe word we need to use? You know, or is there, do we need to make sure that everyone can speak? Could be in your culture. We don't speak over each other. We always speaking from the I, you know, like knowing some of those, like, what's it called? Just lost it. Like there's showing some non-violent communication techniques, for example, you know, can be put in the culture. Like speaking from the I is a really important one, like that people don't blame others. You know, there's no blaming, there's no projecting. There is always like, I feel unsafe when you say this or do this. So having techniques like that helps. And the Art of Facilitation book, that's based on our training, has a lot of some of that things in there on what's really important to create a safe group container. And you as a facilitator, you're standing really, really strong and holding that culture. So when someone breaks the culture, you intervene. And you can just do that quite certainly because you are protecting the group, you know, you're always standing there for the group. So that's not okay, and the group decided that's not okay. So what's happening here? Do we need to change the culture, or, you know, really picking people up on their behavior? That's agreed. But being in the storm is certainly a muscle that I had to build over time through practice and training, and that's why our training is always practice. And breathing. You have to breathe. Silence, knowing that people are also scared of conflict. I often celebrate conflict. I say, hey, we finally got to conflict. That gets us to the next stage in our group. Let's now work through it, and then so we can get to performance. And that's just mind-blowing for people. It's really, really changing. It takes the edge off, you know, because if you as the facilitator are not afraid and you're making it okay, as long as it is safe and within the culture, then people relax. You know, because you are like the mother or the father of the group, you know, like it's funny what happens. Like my mentor often said, see a group a bit like a 3-year-old. They are like, you know, like in group dynamics, lots of family constellation stuff comes up, and you as a facilitator hold a sort of guardian role, you know, and that's really what the group trusts you to do. So if you get comfortable in the conflict and making it okay and moving it into fear, into curiosity, like, oh wow, that's interesting, let's have a look at this, you know, like what can we do about this? then yeah, and celebrating diversity and standing and valuing diversity, and not making anything. It's not about right or wrong. That's the biggest culture to stand in, I feel. It's about, does something work or doesn't it work? And that's the other thing you learn in our training. You intervene, and then we sometimes coach you and say, okay, look, how did that intervention go? Did it work or did it not work? Okay, try another intervention. You wanted to achieve something else, so try another intervention. So you're learning lots of intervention practices.
Yeah. Simone, there's a question in the chat which we might actually attend to after we stop the recording, but because you've created a beautiful segue for me to talk a little bit and ask you about some of the training that is available. I attended one of the Zenergy training sessions earlier in the year, and that experience that you've just described of being coached in the moment is so incredibly powerful, very challenging, really for those that aren't sort of familiar with this sort of methodology. One of the real strengths of the Zenergy training is to have really experienced people like Simone coaching other facilitators through process, and so you get an opportunity to facilitate a session, and if things are happening where there's a coaching moment, they will actually stop the session and provide an opportunity for a discussion. And I personally found that just so incredibly powerful, as someone that works quite independently and doesn't have people giving me feedback very often, to really kind of look at my own practice and my own work. Simone, I wondered whether you wanted to spend a bit of time now talking about some of the training that's available, and then we might stop our recording and people can ask some questions in a kind of more fluid way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned Zenergy quite often here. So Zenergyglobal.com. I can put I put a link into the chat now. They have a diploma of facilitation, which is I picked out four different training sessions in total. I just put in the chat a specific course that's coming up really soon. Stage 1 of the diploma is the art of facilitation. And the 4 sessions can be done. So there's a stage 2, a stage 3, and 2 master classes. So you can do them in your own pace and time. And we actually recommend people to do that training slowly, because between the different training sessions, you have lots and lots of practice to integrate the new stuff you've learned. And then you get deeper on the next one, and more and more. And we practice more and more on your, what we call particular leading edges, which is your things that you find difficult. We all have those. There's always something, where we have an edge, which is always hard. And there are other things that are really, really easy for us. So we more and more work with those until you really gain mastery, and that's the diploma. So this, what I just shared, is the art of facilitation, which is the starting point. And the next one coming up, we actually deliver online, but it gives you the extra bonus of flexibility. You don't have to show up somewhere for 5 days for the workshop. You can call in from different countries. They're all different, good time zones for New Zealand and India as well. We have Europe on the call as well. So they're like first day evening 5 to 9 for Australia. 8 sessions, and you get the extra bonus of a bit of how to facilitate online, but you can all of those techniques you're using, of course, in face-to-face as well. So you're getting all the foundations of how to facilitate as a whole person facilitator. And you get all the practice and all of that, what I talked about. And you can see the content overview, what's sort of some of the key points. You get a book, The Art of Facilitation by Dale Hunter, which I recommend anyway to get, even if you don't do the training. Yeah, it's a great resource with lots and lots and lots of processes. So because you're here, you get a little extra discount. So if you want to come to this next one, the link is in the chat. I'm happy to give you a 20% discount on either of the price groups that are applying for you. If you claim it before the end of 7th of September, which is our early bird ending. If you have any financial questions, issues, have a chat with me, because we do have payment plans, and we really try to make it possible for anyone to come. So there's more things you can talk about. And if you want to talk about anything else, you're also welcome to have a free chat with me. When you have anything going on, there's also my details in the chat. yeah, very happy to help and answer any questions. That's me.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Simone. It's been wonderful hearing about your take on facilitation and challenges, and some things that people might want to do next in terms of accessing that training and reaching out to you, or at the very least reading the Art of Facilitation book. We'll stop the recording now, and people can jump in and we can have a bit more of an informal conversation. Thank you.